Hi, I'm Judy Thompson. I teach English as a second language and I love my job. I'm here today at the Radical English Summit in Lleida, Spain with some of the other Radical English teachers. We have Rita Baker from the UK. We have Teresa Almeida Testa from Lisbon, Portugal. I'm from Canada. This is Peggy Tharp from California, United States, and we are at Jennifer England's home. This is Jennifer England, and we are at the English Laboratory in Lleida. So they're making me talk because I am the Simon Cowell of English teaching talent. So there are thousands and thousands of contacts on my LinkedIn and social media, and of the thousands of connections that I've had, a half a dozen, not very many more teachers stood up head and shoulders above and beyond what other English teachers were doing. They caught my attention, and then it was Rita Baker who posted, "We have to radically change the way English is taught," and that caught my attention immediately, and from there we all connected. So I'm going to let Rita talk to you for a few minutes about what makes us radical and ties us all together.
Okay, I've been teaching over 45 years and teaching English as a foreign language, and during that time I've gone through all sorts of methodologies. I mean, I started off myself as a language student with so-called grammar translation. By the time I came into teaching, we were into the structural approach, which is still very much a grammar-based approach. I then moved into something which was considered innovative, and that was the situational approach, by which you learned pattern dialogues, which was great as long as when you engaged in a pattern dialogue, the other person knew their part of the dialogue, which in real life just didn't happen. And then we moved into what was generally known as the communicative approach, which I have sometimes called the manipulative approach, because the principle was great, but in practice the activities that we had to do in class were so set up they weren't real, and so I didn't feel that really worked. And then we moved into task-based teaching, which was quite good. You set the students a task, and then instead of presenting and practicing and getting them to produce, they produced language, and then you fed it back to them and reorganized it, and that was I felt moving in the right direction. And then we came into the lexical approach, which recognized that we don't build up a language word by word as if we were building a house brick by brick, but we actually learn prefabricated chunks, and we actually put those together, which is a much more rapid way and that's anyway how a native speaker does it. With all these approaches though, none of them really were adequate in themselves. And I think the lightning moment was when I read that 80% of our brain cells, of the cells we use for learning, are actually dedicated to detecting pattern and making meaning. And what struck me with that was, as human beings, we are designed to learn by perceiving pattern, and yet the standard approach to teaching anything, and specifically language teaching, is we dissect it and hand it out in tiny little chunks, and actually what we do is destroy the pattern. And then that brought together lots of things which I had learnt along the way, such as one size does not fit all, because every learner is an individual. That you have to start from where the individual is. You can't just impose learning on somebody, you've got to start from where they are. Basically, what I myself produced was a set of tools, because I realised also, and I think this is fundamental, that learning a language is not an academic activity. It's not a school subject. Learning a language involves your whole body, it involves your whole mind, and it involves your emotions as well as your intellect. So I decided what I needed to produce was some tools to help people to learn, to help them to connect to what they already knew, to help them see the pattern. And that to me was radical, because it was just turning language teaching on its head. So that's where I came in. And The exciting thing when Judy contacted me and put me in touch with other people she was in touch with was I realised I was part of a group of systems thinkers. By systems thinking, I mean, I belong to a group which, not just of language teachers, but of business managers, all sorts of people who see everything connected to everything. And I've realised that my colleagues here today see things in that way, that we see language as system, as a set of interrelated systems. And this is what we have so much in common.
Mm.
And now, the exciting thing about this group of people is everybody, each one of us in their own way, has come up with a tool to help people to learn and to teach a certain aspect of English. And I'd like to turn to Teresa, who's almost as old as I am, but not quite.
I taught English as a foreign language for 33 years, and I always noticed that my students had problems pronouncing specific words, certain words, but I don't think it ever occurred to me of a way to help them. And later on in my career, one day in class, it dawned on me that I could use Portuguese sounds to help them pronounce English words. Pronounce them my way, of course, but then there's so many Englishes and so many different English pronunciations nowadays. So I started out the system, the strategy, and I found out that it worked. Students really got into it, and it helped them. It became intuitive for them to pronounce words that way. So I started by creating a pronunciation page on the internet. This was back in 2003, and I carried on for another 6-7 years. So it's a tried, tested, and proven strategy, or we can say that it's a tool, as Judy said, actually, it's a tool that bridges the L1 and the L2, and hopefully it can be used as a bridge between other native languages and English, or even other languages, foreign languages, between a native language and any other language. Right. No, I was excited about Judy's system. She once contacted me 2.5 years ago in LinkedIn and said she had this pronunciation, this phonetic alphabet actually, and I didn't know who Judy Thompson was, never heard of her, Googled her name, and I came up with a lot of interesting stuff, and I got back to Judy and said, well, I have this pronunciation strategy that, using Portuguese sounds to help my students pronounce English. And so, we kept on, contacting, right?
Yeah, I was excited about it.
Yeah, so it was, we had this common point, right, among us,
Yep.
between us. So Judy, can we now hear about your phonetic alphabet, your English phonetic alphabet?
Absolutely. Actually, I'd love to talk about my moment of brilliance that I came up with that. So I was teaching advanced students, and I was teaching them pronunciation, and of course we were using the International Phonetic Alphabet. And what occurred for me as wrong in my school was no student before the advanced students could even take pronunciation. They weren't addressing their speaking at all because the International Phonetic Alphabet was so difficult to use. So that just seemed wrong on so many levels, but I was working with it till I walked to class one day and noticed long E, the E sound was inside the name of the color green. And then I thought, oh, that's just funny, what do you know? And then the red color held short E, and then I thought, ooh, long U is in blue. By the time I got to my classroom door, the possibility that there was a strong connection here was born. I gave my class something to do. I told them not to bother me. And wrote out the rest of the colors, letters, and each and every one had one and only color beside it. So the association with colors and vowels was really groundbreaking, and I subsequently developed a phonetic system that made more sense, that was more intuitive, which I called the English phonetic alphabet. And because it uses colors, the alphabet, and the most basic tools that all students get when they begin to study a new language, it was useful and appropriate to teach it to even the most beginner students. So it gave pronunciation, access to pronunciation to the most basic students. And it's worked out really well.
Yeah.
So while I was on posting all my statements and controversial defenses and attacks, pretty much, about the International Phonetic Alphabet and how English is currently taught, a woman's name came up, Peggy Tharp, and she said, I've been teaching pronunciation for 30 years, and I think the International Phonetic Alphabet works pretty well. So why don't you send me your alphabet and let me have a look at it? And I said, all right, and I sent it to her, and less than 24 hours later, she responded and saying, this is better. She said, not only is this better, I didn't realize how much I modified the English phonetic alphabet, the International Phonetic Alphabet, and made my own phonetic alphabet out of it, and it's part of my system for teaching pronunciation and accent reduction. And that was my introduction to Peggy Tharp. She was instantly my hero.
Hers is better too. But you got to work with what you have. Yes, so I came to this point of being in sync with these fine teachers over a long path. I started as an elementary ESL teacher. I learned a lot from teaching children. Next, I was an instructional coach. I learned a lot from helping other teachers think about their own thinking and their own learning. And eventually I ended up being asked to do accent reduction or pronunciation. And I was hired to teach pronunciation, and I studied everything I could get my hands on. This is pre-radical English. I devoured everything, and I knew I was able to inform my students and my clients, but I knew also I was not making any kind of permanent change in their sound. They were smarter about pronunciation. They didn't change a single thing. Then I had a moment of awareness when I was in the dentist's office, when I realized our tongues, our speaking, our muscles are autonomous, and we have no idea what they're doing, and we don't need to because they work functionally fine in our first language. But when it comes to second language, you have to become aware so that you can change. My goal was change, helping students make the change they wanted. And that took me down a long path of how do we change something we're not aware of. And I learned that being physical, speaking is physical, so change is going to have to be physical. I learned that we think in patterns, and so change is going to have to come by addressing our pattern thinking in our clients. And I learned that rhythm, the rhythm of English, is based on duration and things like that, and I found some very interesting and unconventional and radical tools to help people learn how English is different from whatever language they are unaware of but know so completely, right? And then I met these ladies, and we realized that we all have these patterns that we saw, and we realized that students have a great deal of gifts that they come with, and they just need to be aware of the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a real revelation to work with this group. I really enjoyed it.
So there were little undertones going on, although none of these teachers had met each other. I could hear the sameness in what they were saying, that they reduced different aspects of English to its simplest form, and were delivering that to students, which was manageable for students at every level. So while I was having my little conflicts on LinkedIn and LinkedIn groups, defending my new position about how to teach pronunciation and my new system, I was taking a beating from the traditionalists and the IPAists, if you will. And this little voice came out of nowhere, Jennifer England, and she just started posting in my defense. You know, you people are just jealous because you didn't think of it, and what this woman is saying is right. So that was how I met Jennifer, and when I researched her on the internet, she had a website, she had a school, she had incorporated all aspects of reading, writing, listening, speaking, and new ways of teaching all of them to children, to corporations. She was a ball of fire, and I'm going to say all on her own. You were all on your own. You were all on your own. I was all on my own, all on your own, all on your own. So there was something the same about us that drew us all together.
Okay, my big aha moment in ESL was my very first class. I showed up prepared with a whole bunch of stuff that I got off the internet, and as soon as I sat down beside the student, I realized that it was complete garbage and it wasn't going to work. And then when I moved to Spain over 20 years ago, Dos cervezas, por favor, was the total Spanish that I spoke, and I learned to speak Spanish in the market. And I didn't go to school to learn it. And I realized when I was sitting beside that student, suddenly I saw two bodies on slabs, a Spanish body and an English-speaking body. And I opened them up and I dissected them, and they were exactly the same inside. And I realized that I could take what I knew from my experience of learning Spanish, and I could apply that to my students so that they could learn English the same way. And then I met these wonderful women, these wonderful radical women, and they each gave me some absolute gem of wisdom that made me think, why didn't I think of that before? It was just so obvious once it had been explained. And I'm just so happy to be a part of this radical mastermind group.
So we're coming to the end of the line here, but before we go, there is another member, and it's Judith Tarzi from Hungary. And I met Judith also on LinkedIn when she was building pictures for vocabulary to teach children English using computer games. And she said, oh, I have a children's program, It was absolutely brilliant. What I realized that maybe she didn't was it's suitable for adults too. Anyone learning English could use the games and the structures and the fun that she was having building her vocabulary. So she couldn't be at this meeting with us, but she's very, very much a part of our group. And we've reached out and met other from Australia and from others from England and the United States who are using these same kinds of systems, simple systems, share the system with the student, and then they're operational and functional in that aspect of English almost immediately. So Rita's going to give us a little conclusion.
So I think what we can see emerging here is that each of us has come to our state of enlightenment or our aha moment quite independently and in many ways quite differently. But one thing we absolutely share in common, we have all seen that there is a pattern to learning, and that learning needs to be learner friendly. It has to be enjoyable. I mean, we're programmed to enjoy we're programmed to learn, and traditional ways of teaching very often destroy that pleasure. So that's what really makes us radical, that we're coming from completely the opposite end of the spectrum, and many of us have experienced opposition, and it's been career-threatening in many ways, and it's taken a lot of confidence to stand up for what we believe in. And why we enjoy each other's company so much is we're able to reinforce each other and to realise that whatever insights we've come up with are actually very widely, globally applicable. It's not just applicable to English. You can apply it to any language learning. So if you're one of those people who feels frustrated that somehow the system you're in or the way you're teaching is not really working in the way that you'd like, but without creating too many waves, you'd like the support to work more intuitively in a way that you know does work, then why not join us and be radical with us?
Well, thanks for joining us here at
Lalbi
at
English
in
Language
Spain.
Center.
And where are we meeting next?
Hungry.
Hungry. So you will for sure get to hear from Judith in person, and Lord knows how many more of us will be here at that time. So that we're radical English teachers. That's what we're about.
It's contagious. You might catch it.
Yeah.